Content and Consequences lifts the curtain between the creative and business side of entertainment. There are those that create content and those that deal with the business consequences of making it. Featuring live interviews with industry disruptors, we showcase the process and aftermath of creative content development. Content and Consequences is part of Rogue Matter, a digital content platform providing programming and entertainment that shatters boundaries and colors outside the lines. Join the movement. Go Rogue. RogueMatter.com. Hello, everybody. It's Jordan Elizabeth Gelber, and we have a brand new guest on our awesome Filmocracy set. We have David Grasso with us today. Hi, David.
Oh, my goodness. A familiar face.
It's great bringing friends on my podcast. I feel a lot less intimidated, but you're not just one of my friends. You're someone that I've gotten to know very well over the last year. We've been besties in quarantine, I would say.
Yeah, we're Zoom buddies. You know, we've met in real life several times now. We've been to each other's houses. So, you know, we made the relationship work, but we started off virtually.
Yes. And now our lovely friendship has gotten us here where you're on my podcast. David also has a podcast, which we'll talk about. But yeah, I met David through Bold TV. And Bold TV is an amazing media company who I'll have him introduce it. But he has been someone who's been in the business trenches of content creation with me. We are not just content creators, but we deal a lot with the back end of content creation, which is why I was so inspired to make this podcast, because so many people who create content have no idea of the business and development end of content creation. They think that, oh, I'll just make something and someone will see it and give me money and it's great. But you laugh because it's true. It's true. But for us, for the people that are out in the mud and the thick of it with the boomers and the media bigwigs and stuff, we've survived. And David, you are thriving. So David, please, before I ramble on, because I adore you so much, I can go on like crazy. Please introduce yourself to everybody, who you are and what you do.
So I'm David Grasso. I grew up in Florida. That's where I'm currently right now. I am someone who grew up between a lot of different cultures. I was an exchange student 5 times. I was someone who always dreamed of working in media and never really found a path because, as you know, media is the fastest disappearing white-collar profession on earth. So I never thought, well, I'm never going to make it because I come from an immigrant hustler background. I decided to become a media entrepreneur. And basically, I created my own job through some out-of-the-box thinking. And that's how I got to where I am today, is by being a bridge between people who don't talk to each other and by really creating my own network so that I would have gainful employment and the opportunity to reach millions of people a month.
And you've been exceptionally successful in doing that. I must say, it's been wonderful seeing how you've grown Bold TV. So Bold TV originally was what, and what is it now, for those that don't know?
So Bold TV was very noble in its original mission, and it was started by a friend of mine that I know. And basically, she wanted to grow it into a brand that was bipartisan news, right? Which was actually more relevant now than it was back then in 2015 when she started it. Basically, straight line news, something that we used to see a lot of 20 years ago, something that is exceedingly rare these days. Bold TV remains committed to that mission. Instead of being a for-profit, I positioned it as a nonprofit. And basically what we look to do is be a public service to people and say, hey, listen, I know there's a lot of noise out there, right? But let's give you the information in a digestible, nonpartisan manner that celebrates what we have in common instead of what we have apart.
And Bold TV in the last year has not only grown and built so many different distribution platforms in itself. I mean, social media, the website, YouTube channel, etc. But Bold TV has become a place where people look for new information for millennials and Gen Z alike. And I've been so inspired by Bold TV because last year, as we all know, the world completely shut down. But companies like Bold showcased to all of us that you can create a media platform from the comfort of your own home, because we were all working remotely last year and Bold TV grew exponentially. What were some of the first kind of, I don't want to say problems, but some of the frustrations you first came across when you transitioned from being a typical studio to now working mostly remotely? I mean, I know you have a studio space, but you transformed over the year.
I think we learned that remote work works, especially when it comes to content creation, and that most of our staff prefers it. Two, we learned that the cost of equipment had come crashing down in recent years, and we hadn't fully realized that reality. So we created small, nimble studios. We brought down the price of creating content, which really makes us have a much greater nonprofit. So we discovered that not being in a physical place wasn't really a barrier. And it was something that was really revolutionary for us. And a lot of media companies, I imagine, have discovered the same thing. In fact, famously, a lot of newspapers, including the Miami Herald and the Orlando Sentinel here in Florida, no longer have a headquarters and continue to do the work they do every day. Of course, for videos, we need a physical footprint, but we are basically in 150 square feet. We have $10,000 worth of equipment. We have one other person here with me, and we do what a $250,000 studio used to do not so long ago. So it's really a fundamental reshaping of content creation and really assimilating the fact that costs are low, opportunity is endless, and that the challenges of today are radically different than they were even in the not so distant past.
Now, you did not have your start necessarily in video production, which is what you do now because you run Bold TV. But where was your start? Where did you come? What world did you come from?
I come from politics and corporate and television media. I was a television journalist for Sinclair Broadcasts. I worked for a local ABC affiliate. I also worked for Telemundo, which, of course, when I would go to press conferences, no one would suspect I was the Spanish language reporter. Spanish is my first language, and no one would hire me. So I first worked in Spanish language media here in Florida. I'm really fundamentally an entrepreneur. If you even go further back than that, my first memories are managing rental properties that my mother owned, really running businesses, finding ways to win in a world where you had a lot of control over your fate, and a lot of it had to do with just working hard. And I brought a lot of those ethics and lessons learned from all these different types of worlds to content creation, which is something that is usually more associated with artistic, create you, Jordan, and not really associated with, straight line, business thinking, the bottom line, et cetera. And funny enough, I created it as a nonprofit to even be able to experiment more and risk take because I brought my entrepreneurial zest to a space that was ripe for disruption.
Disruption is probably my favorite word. And, I think that is really why I wanted to bring you on the podcast, because I have so many friends in the creative space when it comes to content creation. We have screenwriters and we have horror film buffs and we have people who want, their little micro series to get on the next big platform. But I don't have a lot of people in my space that have transformed necessarily like unscripted content or news or reporting or storytelling from their perspective. What do you think are the biggest differences between unscripted content and narrative content when it comes to content creation, aside from like I have a script and maybe actors? But I think for me, I would assume, and maybe that's wrong for me to say, but I would assume to be really authentic sometimes comes at a price.
I find that increasingly, because this has been an education for me as well, I'm someone who has read very few fiction books and consumes very little fiction. I'm very much a nonfiction person. I'm finding that entertainment is incredibly similar to news and information, that entertainment is at the heart of everything, and that culture is ultimately downstream from social norms. And really that translates into politics. So I'm discovering that the line is very blurred, and that moreover, most content, whether it's informational or for entertainment, needs to be digestible. So I actually take a lot of my cues from entertainment, not from news. And you would be surprised. And I take my visual cues of what things should be looking like on screen from actually sports programming, because I feel like that's the most visually enriching format. Specifically, I'm referring to ESPN and Major League Baseball Network. I take my inspiration from corners that people would never really imagine. And it's a lot because people in my area tend to stay in their own little echo chambers. And people in
Mhm.
your area, Jordan, tend to do the same. So
Of
I
course.
find there's a lot of power in looking at the other side for ideas. And I find that entertainment and culture is an inspiring angle to really supercharge any sort of news operation.
100%. I think that is why you are so innovative, because people like us, we look so closely. We come into an industry where everyone's been doing the same thing the same way for so long, and they think that repeating the same recipe is going to come out tasting better for some reason. But when you think outside the box and you see what's been successful for other verticals and you bring it to where you're going for, like your goals that you're going for, you can see how it kind of unveils or blossoms into a new potential. I think it's great that you take cues from entertainment and you brought it into the new space. And of course, sports, that makes total sense. Because I mean, you and I also are people that struggle with the social media devils when it comes to constantly keeping up with the trends. And so many people will come to me at least and say, oh, I want to get viral. I want to get influencers, because they see that another brand saw that influencers somehow helped them. But what worked for somebody might not work for you. And being different is a good thing. And I really think a testament to your success is because you're not afraid to take risks. And I've seen so many people in content creation afraid to take risks because they're so afraid of what people are going to do.
Well, the formula in media is very simple. You pander to a certain audience, pander to a certain demographic, whether it's NPR, who is pandering to urban white liberals, or, let's say Fox News, who's pandering to a middle America, also white, largely male audience. So, and that's fine. It works for them. I'm just not interested in a single demographic. I feel like a lot of the problems that we have in society are because of these echo chambers, and disrupting those will make society better. And really, if you look at culture, culture is consumed universally, especially by young people who tend to be more open-minded and less stuck in the wars of their mothers and fathers. So I really fundamentally look at what the culture is among young people, and what I see is a radical generation shift in the way they view the world. And that's really exciting from a content creation perspective. But in the meantime, getting there isn't easy, especially because, Jordan, let's face it, you and I are still relatively young in terms of
Mhm.
the people who actually pull the levers in society and have the resources to build the media ecosystem that we all desire. So I find that I'm a bridge between those who are currently pulling the levers and those who are younger than me, who are creating the authentic culture that we're all seeking.
I think the bridge concept is very relevant right now. You know, you're working with me with Aperture, which I'm very grateful for, but the purpose of Aperture was also to be a bridge from one end to the other, because that middle area never gets the love it deserves. And if it's the support is not there as you're taking the journey, it's going to crumble and you're going to fall. So having people like you there to support that and kind of facilitate that not only puts you in a position of power, but puts you in a trusted position. And finding people to trust is the hardest thing that I found in this industry. And I think you're so transparent about whether things can be accomplished one way or another, but you allow people to kind of talk to you about their problems. How can I solve them? What do you think would be good for me on both ends? So let's talk about age for a second. I think that's a really, really good point. You and I are relatively young, and
Yes.
many people might say to us, well, how did you do this? How did you get started? And for me, I know that I, like you, love disruption. Like I said, it's my favorite word of the year so far, but I'm not afraid to just going out there and asking somebody when I want something. But I've seen so many of our peers be afraid of that. What inspired you to take the leaps that you take, and what drove you to have the career that you have now?
I don't think I ever took my career seriously until I got into a serious relationship, if I'm being fully transparent. I think I was inspired by my husband and by achieving a sort of certain economic stability. And I think that sort of ambition was always there, but it really got supercharged by that. So if you really want to trace my rise, it has a lot to do with my time with my current husband. And really the inspiration to do more comes from him. And a lot of that is something our generation doesn't talk about. Our parents had a lot more pressure to succeed because, let's face it, they started earlier in life than we did. And, it's the chicken or the egg, right? We start later because there's fundamentally less opportunity for our generation than there was for theirs, all other things considered. But it's also because when the stakes are higher, you rise to the occasion. And I feel like that's definitely the case when it comes to my life, is that he was very inspiring. I'm a privileged kid. I grew up in excellent circumstances, and I was exposed to all different types of cultures and situations. And it really, the culmination of being a fully baked adult and bringing to the table a lot of experience is what really ignited this path that I'm now on. Not the answer you expected.
No, I love your husband. Shout out to Hugo. We love your husband, who is insanely inspiring in himself.
Well, he's a rocket scientist, so
Yeah,
he might, exactly. So he definitely brings his A game to the relationship.
me and my rocket scientist.
Yeah, I don't know any others. He's the only one.
He's the only one I know.
I think it was also that so we are living longer, but our expectations have changed. We are a very impatient generation. We don't really agree with the way things are, and we agree that things are ripe for disruption, but a lot of times it's a grind and it's a waiting game. And you get old in the process. I'm old now, and I'm happy to be my age. I'm significantly older than you, Jordan. And for many years, I worked for a boss that was much dumber than me. Mm-hmm. And thank God that's no longer the case. But those years were difficult, and there was a lot of fun involved, but there was a lot of learning. And a lot of times, learning hurts, and it's not what you expect. And there is no chronology to success. Sometimes it takes a really long time, and it takes a lot of patience. So to me, the reality is somewhere in between to what boomers say about us, that we're entitled and that we're impatient. Some of that's true. But the other side of that is a lot of us haven't ever been given the opportunity to really make those decisions and elevate ourselves and really move the needle. And I'm feeling in my life, I'm getting those opportunities for the first time. And I'm that much more careful and more grateful to have them. I think if I had had these 10 years ago, I wouldn't have done as well as I'm doing now.
I think that's such a wonderful life lesson to take away from this, because it's true. You and I have been, even though we are a little bit different in age, but we've been hustling for a long time. I know people 10 years ago from now who weren't doing half the things that I do at my age, or I'm sure could look back and say something similar. And it's now not only having a seat at the table, but being part of the conversation and having your voice actually listened to and saying, what do you think? How are you? What would you do differently?
It's a lonely climb to the top too. You'd be surprised what they never meet your heroes, because you're going to be disappointed, and everything's forgivable except success. You lose some friends and family along the way because, people always expect certain things from certain people. And when you rise far beyond what people expected of you, there's some loss involved. And there's some depersonalization that you have to do in order to keep yourself sane and keep yourself present.
Yes. 100 times yes. There are losses. If everyone thinks that entrepreneurship or content creation, which in itself is entrepreneurship, if you, of course, making your own content, it is very frustrating to learn all these losses because, as you and I have previously discussed, people get lost in the glitz and glam that is content creation. They think it's, exciting and it's shiny and it's PR and having your soundbite here and having someone make merch for you. No, it's a grind. We're working all the time looking for the best stories to tell, looking for new people to converse with, and looking for trusted individuals to kind of play in our own sandbox and make new things.
And the worst people are talent. The worst people is us, Jordan.
Oh,
and really, it's a very rare person who's able to do this, right? And actually do the hard work. And they're two very distinct set of skills. And if you can write on top of that, like you're the invisible pink unicorn. And
Oh yeah.
unfortunately, people who are on camera are very vain. Journalists are very stuck up. Actresses and actors
Very
and
stuck up.
very stuck up. We are a snobby folk. And I imagine I myself am even snobby to an extent. But even understanding that and understanding that it affects my worldview and my behavior and my day-to-day life has been a big factor in understanding, what my blind spots are.
In the world of content creation and observing blind spots and growth and how things have changed, when you started your journey in journalism and now, the term content creation has been very different. It's very malleable. It's turned into so many different things. Do you think that if you were equipped with the same access to stories, media, equipment, do you think you would have a similar kind of track to success that you'll have now if you had what you had before?
The problems are different now, Jordan. There are apples and oranges. So back then, and this isn't too long ago, this was really, I got started as a journalist at the age of 29. I'm now 37. So you're talking about 8 years ago. I think that distribution was easier back then, but the barriers to entry were higher. So now we have the opposite problem. Anyone with a camera can make content, right? But social media had very high levels of growth when I started in journalism. And today, those levels have come down and the game gets harder and harder and there's more saturation. So the challenges are different. If I were coming of age now, I would also lament the fact that I wasn't classically trained as a television journalist. A lot of those roads to training and whatnot, I am a classically trained news station television journalist. Do you have any idea how rare that is?
Exceptionally rare. Exceptionally rare.
I think I'm the last of that generation to go to a small market and really, cut my teeth doing things that in 10 years probably won't be as common as they are today. So I feel blessed to have traversed that path. Do I wish I still lived in the era where I turned on Facebook Live and I had 100,000 viewers? Of course. Life would be a lot easier for me. Do I miss that era? Absolutely not.
It's so funny you say that you think it was more accessible before than it is. I mean, we had gatekeepers, but they were, I don't know. I just find it so interesting what you said, because to me, I feel like it was easier for me before to get direct access, but now it's even harder because of the saturation. So on this podcast, we talk about content and consequences, the consequences of making content. And one of the biggest things one of the biggest pain points that I've heard from content creators who come to me for help is that they don't know who to talk to, and they know like a few names, and they think that the only way to get someone's attention is spending a lot of money on something regardless of the quality. Yet I find that now because there's so much saturation, thinking differently, I have more access. I've had more contacts now than I ever did before. And it's interesting how where you're standing, it was almost better before than it is now. And for me, I like it now better than it was before, because this gatekeeper situation is so frustrating for the creative individual, whether you're an actor or a musician or a filmmaker in the general creative sense. We get so lost in all these powers that be when we realize the powers that be aren't really there. It's just making those strong relationships and having something worth talking about that's not self-serving.
I think it's harder to get started. I think the barriers are lower. I think that it's a much more democratic world, right, for content creators, but you have to understand we're dealing with a different world now. It was very inorganic before. It was very much the gatekeepers decided what went and what didn't, and that model is falling apart before our very eyes. So now you have a chance, but you're not going to make statistically as you would have in the former world. Now, I would prefer this world, don't misunderstand me, because we create content that really represents us, which is something that has been missing for quite a long time. And I think people know that the content doesn't represent regular people. It represents people in certain cities or certain demographics or certain politics or certain worldviews. And now this is content made by us. And I think that's a much better world, honestly.
I think it's great that you can talk to your peer group and connect with people all over the world. That's the one thing I've really, truly enjoyed, because you and I have connected, and I would never have gotten to connect to you if I, wasn't involved in the things I was involved with. And I think community has opened up the worlds of creativity. But I agree. I think that especially in the last year, not to keep harping on quarantine, but it is something that changed the entertainment industry immensely. I know it also changed your industry as well, even though we kind of straddle the same line a little bit. But what kind of pause button went into effect last year that you weren't expecting?
I think this borderless, low production quality, decentralized nature of things made content creation better accidentally. Mm-hmm. And I think it made my job easier. And I got to connect with a group of like-minded peers that were not anywhere close to me physically. And that is unusual. I became CEO because of the pandemic. I grew because of the pandemic. The politics of the day, including the election and coronavirus and shutdowns and masks and all of that, were really hard to live through, but a boon for content creators. It gave us so much material. And the rate of social change that was last summer, and the nasty stuff that we've seen before our eyes has made us understand ourselves better. And it's an era that's very ripe for cultural change and economic change and really media change. Media needs a new formula, and I want to be there. And we're trying to discover what that new ecosystem looks like. We don't have all the answers, and anyone who says they have all the answers is wrong.
And you are definitely not only there, I think you're pioneering it. I think you're
I'm
one
trying.
Of the
It's not easy.
You are.
Remember, when you invent something, they first call you crazy.
It's true, but that's why we're friends, right? You and I just assure each other, it's okay, we have the same kind of crazy.
Media should represent us,
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't have left-wing and right-wing channels or channels pandering to a certain demographic. You should have channels that represent America, because this is a wide and diverse country, and we have more in common than we have apart.
Yes, and I think last year really started opening up the stories by us, for us, made by our peers. It wasn't just one person dictating what we were going to see. It was people telling stories about things that really meant something to them. And it's been wonderful to see that change and be a part of that change, and also come on the common ground that all of us went through the struggle of last year, but we've all come out our own ways in different versions of success. So I want to wrap up with one big thing. We talk on this podcast about content and consequences, but I think for you, what I like to discuss is lessons that you've learned. Obviously, you were never a CEO of a company like Bold before. You were navigating it, but what are some of the lessons that you've learned through the growth of your career and the growth in, building a network that you didn't know before?
Leadership matters much more than we think, and people replicate the form of their leader. There's a reason why CEOs are paid so much money, whether you think that's fair or not. Leadership is everything. 2, company culture is the most powerful force that you can possibly have, and you need to let your employees create their own culture and respect it as a leader. 3, business is changing faster than the speed of lightning. You need to be always looking ahead and also making different bets, because you never know where your growth is going to come from. We live in a world that is highly unstable and unpredictable, so you have to have a very diverse portfolio. And finally, you have to always put yourself on trial. I think that anyone who comes into a situation bearing, this whole I know everything idea and this whole worldview of I have all the answers has been enormously destructive to both public, private, and nonprofit entities. And I think we need to change those norms. We expect our leaders to know anything. A leader listens, a leader understands, and a leader has empathy and understands that he or she depends on those around them to fuel their success.
That cut it, wrap it. That was great. I'm going to steal that now. I think that lesson alone, put yourself on trial, is sadly a thing I don't see from people. It's not there. People don't put themselves on trial. They don't take responsibility or look to put themselves in the ring of fire. They're all like, oh, I'm amazing, and this is why I'm so amazing. But staying humble and true and connecting with your team and having a team and not being afraid to be vulnerable in front of your team. David,
and learning from failure. Never forget that. Failure is how heroes are made. Failure is the most important part of learning. And I think we all tend to minimize our failures and elevate our successes. And really, it's sometimes more failure than success. But through failure, you learn and you conquer your next conquest.
Yes, 100%. Failure is not a bad thing, guys. It's a wonderful learning process. David, before you tell everybody where they can find you have to tell everybody about your podcast. So please tell us about Follow the Profit.
So I look at money, so it's not biblical, profit, Profit. And I look at the whole world through the lens of money. No, I'm not telling you what stocks to buy. I'm telling you why things are the way they are. And if you want to really trace the origin of why things work the way they work, you really have to understand the flow of money and how it's going from X to Y. And really, that's all I talk about. And we talk about culture, politics, current events, and everything in between through the lens of money.
And what inspires you more than anything else?
I think I'm inspired by the future. I think that humanity is in such a good place to do so much more and do so much better. I'm excited for the future. That's what inspires me. I think a lot of the way we do things today is outdated. And I think that change is coming and it's inevitable. And to me, it's what a time to be alive, to be part of that change that is wildly overdue.
Oh, you are, like I keep saying, definitely part of that change. Everyone should go follow David's podcast, Follow the Profit. And also, David, where can everyone find you and the lovely things that you do?
So my screen name on all socials is Grasso Roots, Grasso Roots. It's obviously inspired by grassroots. It's what I believe is change. You and me, everyone, the community. You can also follow at Bold TV. We do a lot of out-of-the-box content. You know, we do short form video. I'm all over the place. I do a lot of traditional media as much as I beat up on it. TV is still a very powerful tool. I do a lot of political commentary, and it's not what you think. You might be surprised by what I have to say. Whether you're left wing or right wing, I pride myself in being an independent thinker.
Well, David, you are so inspiring, and thank you so much for being on this podcast. It was very intimidating interviewing you because you're such a seasoned interviewer and interviewee, but thank you for being here. I'm so grateful to know you and have you a part of this wonderful journey that we're on. And everybody, thank you again for listening to Content and Consequences. I'm Jordan Elizabeth Gelber, and I will see you next time.